Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment podcast of your host, Charles Kiriakou. Today, I have a very special guest. I know I say I have special guests a lot, but this person has been a mentor to me and has been the guy that really introduced me to NLP, which not even just saying this to blow smoke, but it completely changed the outlook of my life and to essentially what I'm doing for work nowadays. So, yes, I'm joined by Ricky Virdee from Raising Your Game. Ricky, how are you, my friend?
I'm very well, and that was very kind of you, first of all, to say. It's a pleasure to be here. It's amazing what you're doing at the moment. I'm looking forward to really getting into this.
Likewise, my friend. Likewise. Well, for people that may not know you, Ricky, as I said before we clicked recording, I would like to give you the option to kind of just tell people a little bit about what you do, what you've done, and a little bit about who you are before we get into the show.
Sure, okay, not a problem. Well, I like to call myself a behavioural change specialist. I refrain from the word expert. Other people might choose to use that word, and that's because I'm always continuously learning. So being a specialist in the field of behavioural change is what I do. I work with individuals and teams. So that could be executives, where I go in and talk to the leadership teams, executives, MDs of companies, and I can go all the way through to frontline teams. So those who are facing the customers on a day-to-day basis on the ground. And what I'm looking to do with everybody, which if you know this, I'm sure many people do if they're listening in, of course, is that we have one common denominator, and that's our mindset. So irrespective of the role, the industry, and what we do, is we have to all begin with our mindset. So when I call myself a behavioral change specialist, it really starts with the mind. And yes, you mentioned NLP. My journey started many years ago. I would say 15 years ago over that, embarking on the journey of NLP. And I utilize the tools and techniques of NLP, especially if you're thinking about what you're talking about, which is recruitment. So helping people within the recruitment space utilize the tools and techniques of NLP and other skills that I offer to be better on a daily basis.
Nice. Well, honestly, I think that and I've said this to you when we first spoke about potentially recording a podcast together, that if you're a trainee recruitment consultant or any sort of, a derivative of a recruitment consultant listening to this, there's going to be loads of value that you can take out of this. If you're setting up a recruitment business or own a recruitment business or you're a manager or director, again, there's going to be so many transferable tools and techniques through this conversation that you can take in and learn from. But before we get into the topics, and thanks for giving us an intro, I wanted to see if you remember the first time you and I met when Dan introduced us and you done an amazing workshop on goal setting and some like team building stuff. And you probably remember this. If you don't, I'll be very upset. But you gave us like a sheet to set a goal. Do you remember the goal that I
Yes.
set?
Yeah, I'm not going to use the swear words. You
You
can.
can if you want. I'm not sponsored yet, so you can swear.
Yeah, you wanted to be a legend. Let's put it that way.
It's like a running joke. Obviously, I don't work at Projectus anymore, but like it's a running joke there of just like, yeah, Rick, this guy came in who's just like unbelievable, like setting goals, behavioral change, gave everyone this like amazing sheet of questions to set a clear, concise goal. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go and share my goal in front of the whole company. Bear in mind, I'd been at that company for like 4 months, and I just stood up and was like, yeah, I'm going to be a legend. And everyone was like, right, like, how's that actually specific? How's that measurable? Like, is that attainable? I mean, yeah, I'm going to be a legend. And in fairness, Ricky, I did turn out to be a company legend, in fairness.
You've got to have a vision, right?
Oh God, I use that now, and I thought I'd just bring that up because I was 23 at the time, or 20. I was 22 actually. That was about a week or two before my or about a couple of months before my 23rd birthday. And I think anyone that listens to this who is in their early 20s will probably they listen to that and go, yeah, yeah, I'd probably do a similar type of thing. You don't really understand what real goals are and stuff, but you
Yep.
have like this, like you say, you have this idea, this vision of who you want to be. And for me, I just wanted to be someone that wanted to be remembered as almost quite legendary in what I did. And in fairness, I've transitioned and done predominantly retained recruitment and became quite legendary in that respect. But then the older I got and the more I understood about setting and achieving goals, I was like, yeah, that's actually not, you can't do that properly. You have to actually make it specific, measurable, etc. But anyway, that's a short little anecdote to start the show off. But the first thing I wanted to cover, because I get asked this a lot by people when they see that I've got NLP in my
Sure.
LinkedIn bio and stuff like that. And I'm sure you may have had people that you've worked with over the period of time that have said, "Oh, NLP is bullshit. It's not real, etc., etc., etc." But if you could, Ricky, for people that don't really know what NLP is, just tell us a little bit about what what it actually is.
Okay, all right, yeah. And I've heard that many times as well, as you can imagine. The one thing I would say is if you wanted to describe it in layman's terms, I would call it the study of human excellence. And one of the things that got misconceived, I suppose, is how NLP was being used. So, if we think about how it all started at some point when it came over from, let's say, the US into the UK, it
Mm,
was very much around sales and manipulating people. And I
mm,
think that's when you start to recognize that the second people have a narrative around any subject, if you think recruitment, and somebody says, well, in recruitment, you could say that there's actually a negative connotation attached to it to some people.
mm,
So, like anything, it's the narrative that's around it. And what we're doing is we're utilizing the tools and techniques of NLP. So,
mm,
if you break down neuro linguistic programming, which is what NLP stands for, neuro being our senses, right? So,
mhm,
how we take in the world around us. If you wanted to, let's call it dumb it down a little bit.
mm,
Then we think about the linguistic side. So how we use language. So taking in all the information around us, how we apply language, i.e., how we apply meaning, not only internally, also externally. So how we
mhm,
utilize language externally with others around us. And then programming is very much how we do what we do. So, the sequential patterns of our behaviors and our habits, etc., and the actions that we take, it's the end result. So we're
mm,
always running a neuro-linguistic program. And the study of NLP was where the co-creators, and I've been fortunate enough to study under two of the three co-creators, and that is they were modeling excellent behavior. So
mm,
what was the difference that makes a difference between, let's say, the average person versus, somebody who is exceptional within their field?
mm,
And they went out and they modeled these individuals and they coded. And what they decided to do is put together a set of tools and techniques that allows us to not only understand it ourselves and then teach it out to other people so they could be better. So it's the study of human excellence. We are running a neuro-linguistic program on a day-to-day basis. And my role is to make it easier for us to understand ourselves, so self-awareness,
mm,
offer some tools and techniques, and allow people to become better on a daily basis.
mm. I love that. That's such an easy way, and as you said to begin with, almost like an idiot-proof way to kind of explain what NLP actually is. And I mentioned to Ricky before we actually started recording that throughout my time doing NLP and full-time coaching, I've been so passionate about utilizing some of the things that I've learned from yourself and doing the NLP courses and stuff. But initially, when I first started to deploy some of these tools and tactics, they were almost too complicated. And
Mm,
one thing that I've done recently, and I think you quite enjoy this, is and I remember we done the modeling exercise in the NLP Master Prac,
correct.
which again I'd like for you to maybe explain to people what that actually is. But I've been saying to recruiters that are maybe not necessarily underperforming, but they're not really hitting target or over target, but they have the potential.
Yeah.
Is I kind of give them an anecdote as to when I first got into permanent recruitment, it was a massive shift, and I was told by we had like an external L&D person come in like once a fortnight, and she was like, pick certain things of what people do well and make it your own. It's a very layman's term version of it. But when I started to go into the NLP stuff and use it in L&D, it was like, what does, let's say, Joe Bloggs, who's the top biller, what does he believe about what he does?
Mm,
What does he do? What's his behaviors? And what are his habits? How is he disciplined in doing that? How can we model his version or her version of excellence and then ingrain that in what you do, but whilst making it your own? Because if I try to be like you and present how you present and vice versa, it probably won't work. But yeah, I thought that'd be quite an interesting little anecdote for you there.
yeah, agreed. And I love the fact that you've started there by talking about how you could make it your own. If
Mm,
you think about NLP, when they were modeling these experts within their field, it wasn't just so that they could replicate and do everything that the other person is doing alone.
mm,
You got to a point where you understood that maybe you could edit the way somebody did something and bring it into your way of working to be more efficient.
mm,
And that's the beauty of it. So when we talk about mindset, we talk about NLP, we talk about communication, you know that you have your own personality to bring to the table. You're not a robot. You're not going to sit there and be scripted to every single
Mm,
word. You've got to bring your personality. People see through that very quickly.
mm,
So, I'm pleased to say that, you've decided that, you can go and pick the best parts of other people, and then you can bring your own self to the table. And that
mm,
is what makes you. And that is in some ways, without going into full details around what is modeling,
mm,
we are taking the best bits of those individuals and deciding how can we become more efficient, keeping in mind what our desired outcome is.
mm. Yeah, and that's what's really important as well. And I spoke to another coach this morning about this because we're talking about next steps, kind of going away from just doing a one-man band type of thing. And I opened up to him and said, for me, unless I understand what my desired goal is or my desired outcome is, it's quite difficult for me to then commit, because if I commit to something and then think, actually, is this what I really truly want? Is this what I want for my life, my business? It's very difficult. And that's, if I go back to a recruitment sense, I see consultants do this all the time when we set quarterly goals, monthly goals, yearly goals. I want to smash my target. And I'm like,
Mm.
right, okay, cool. You should be aiming for that anyway. But like, why have you set this goal? Like, why do you want to bill X amount? And then sometimes you just get like recruiters scratch their head and they go, well, I think everyone else has set this goal to do 200K, 300K this year, so I want to do it as well. And I'm like, okay, well, if you don't actually really want to do it, if you don't really believe that you can do it, it's, I don't want to say it's a pointless goal to set, but I also don't want to say you're setting yourself up for failure, because I'm also of the belief that you should, set some quite scary goals and some big goals sometimes. But if you're not really sure on what your desired outcome is, then the everything leading up to that can get skewed, I think.
Yeah. And if you think about what we started with when you talk about your why of being
Mm.
a legend when we first met, uh, that's in some ways is being a little bit, in a nice way, slightly delusional, but that's a good thing.
Mm,
You see, because if you set yourself, your why, and
mm,
you believe in yourself, what you've got to work out beyond that is how. How are you going to do that?
mm,
And you might recall me saying just a moment ago about how we do what we do.
mm,
And how we do what we do works in both ways. The things that we deem as good and the things that
mm,
we deem as not so good. So if we are not doing things on a daily basis that are taking you towards, let's say, your vision of being a legend, well, then you need to evaluate, learn from what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and become better at it by shifting the dial.
mm,
And that's what allows you to become better. So, yeah, I think having a why is important, understanding how you're going to do what you're going to do, evaluating, i.e., recognizing and being self-aware of the things that you need to change will allow you to get closer to that outcome. Now, you also mentioned something around, you know, if you don't know your desired outcome. And yes,
mm,
I'm a great believer. You've got to know what you want, and that's where that why comes into place.
mm,
But sometimes people are too rigid, and they have this structure and they lose flexibility and creativity through this absolute structure. You
mm,
have to say this, you have to do this. And they stop learning. They stop being themselves. And I like to call it a framework. I know it's semantics,
mm,
but I would call it a framework. And what you would have is the opportunity to be playful and curious in your approach. So knowing what you want is great.
mm,
Enjoying the journey could be way more important because we
mm.
know the landscape could change. We
Yeah.
know things do change quite often and quickly in recruitment. So what does that mean? That means that the person who's stuck there with a rigid, let's say, goal
Mm,
might not shift their or adapt their behaviors quick enough.
mm.
And then
I
they
want to
lose motivation.
Yeah, I want to pick you up on that, because what you've just said has it's almost like a little bit of a light bulb moment that's gone off in my head. People will know, and I've talked a lot about how I used to do business development, and I've been on many of your courses where, and I use this anecdote a lot, where I went to the first language patterns course, and I had a meeting with a client the next day, and we used all the language patterns, which
Yeah.
hopefully we'll come on to in a bit, to create a pitch, and I pitched it, and I got all these jobs on retained, etc., etc., etc. But going back to what you said a second ago about being playful and not being so rigid in your framework or your process or whatever, I feel like a lot of the time, and I'm keen to hear your opinion on this. that a lot of the reasons why recruiters, especially junior recruiters that are getting into business development, struggle with BD is because they feel like, oh, I'm not speaking to a candidate anymore. I'm speaking to a client. So I have to be a certain way. I have to ask a
Yeah,
certain amount of questions. I have to act a certain way, etc. And they lose that playfulness. Whereas
yeah,
if you look at some of the best BDers, and again, this is a bit of a blanket statement because I know some business developers that are very process driven, and that's a whole other topic. But when you're doing business development, if you're not playful, if you're not being unique and different, that's the whole thing of BD and why it's hard, is
yeah,
because clients, and you worked in the finance and banking industry, those guys are being called by recruiters multiple times a day. You get another call from a recruiter going, "Hello, it's Charles here calling." Oh my God, fuck off. I don't want to hear from you. You're so boring. But if you can kind of go in there and be a little bit playful and ask different types of questions and be different and have fun with it, if you can have fun with it, then hopefully then you'll be able to keep the habit and keep those keep the discipline to keep going because you're just being playful with it, right?
yeah, absolutely. And you've got to know your audience, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think about the range of clients that I work with in different industries, different roles. And I could go into one company who have a very, let's say, professional and formal way of talking. That could be a law
Hmm.
firm, arbitration company, a regulator. And then I
Hmm.
go into a recruitment business and depending on whether in fintech, it's quite casual.
Yeah.
So you have to know your audience. I think that's quite important. And that whole piece around managing your own state is really,
Mm.
really, really powerful. So if you're going to be playful and you're going to be curious and you're taught as, let's call it, a rookie, you're somebody new into the
Mm.
business of recruitment. And as you go in and you're told, go and do this, and then you get a knockback, you get a rejection, or it doesn't work. And how often does that happen, right? It doesn't work. You get a gatekeeper who says nope, and then all of a sudden, everything that you've been taught, this script, this approach, all of a sudden just goes out the window.
Mm.
And then somebody says, no, you just got to keep trying. Be you.
Mm.
And you're still wondering, how do I be me? And when you
Mm.
use the word unique, well, actually, unique is about you being very aware about how you respond to your environment.
Mm.
Because the way that you respond to the environment is your uniqueness. So yes, you get this question of what's your unique selling point? And you
Mm.
hear they are very similar. But how you respond to those rebuttals, that rejection that you get, will be the difference that makes the difference. And that comes
Mm.
down to how you manage your state.
Mm.
So managing that state is so important for you to, be that individual that's going to pick up the phone again,
Mm.
not be worried about a script, being playful, being curious,
Mm.
learning, etc. I mean, I'm sure
Mm.
people get what I mean.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you a little bit more because one of the topics we were going to talk about was what specific techniques do you or have you used with recruiters, recruitment businesses, and it'd be good to just get like kind of what you think have been the most valuable techniques just for your life in general. Because I think a lot of the stuff that I've learned in NLP have just helped me generally as a human and in my personal relationships as well as work, obviously.
Sure.
But I do the very first training session I do in the business development course that I run is about mindset and self-analysis. And there's a whole slide on there about state change. And what's
Yes.
fascinating is that I've done this training session with like recruiters that are 17, 18 years old to recruiters that are 40, 50 years old.
Yeah.
I can probably name on one hand the amount of people when I say, what is a human state? What is state change? And they'll look at each other and go, huh? The fuck is
Yeah.
this guy talking about? So what, I'm not going to say expert, but like as a specialist in this,
Yeah.
like how would you describe to someone that might not know what a state is or state change is? How would you explain that to someone?
Well, a state is a combination of your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors, right? I mean, if you
Hmm.
think about how you could encapsulate that, and for those people who want to understand, how do you manage your state? Just think emotions.
Mm.
It's those feelings that are labeled, which becomes your emotion.
Mm.
And without using too much jargon, if you think of something like synesthesia being actually we have two senses that are firing off at the same time.
Hmm.
So you could have, is it the thought or is it the feeling that comes first?
Right.
Well, actually, sometimes you can't really recognize what came first. So what we're trying to do here is understand that when we have this feeling or we have this thought, well, actually, you have a choice about how you respond to that feeling and how you respond to that thought.
Mm.
So that will allow you to then manage your state. So,
Mm,
if you think about, if we just use a live example of somebody who is new into the business and says,
mm,
you're going to do a BD hour, right? Here's your list, get on the phones. And then all of a sudden they pick up the phone and they're not even ready to pick up the phone. They haven't even managed their own state.
mm,
They're slumped over their desk, shoulders are down. They haven't thought about their
mm,
sorry, start again. They haven't thought about their physiology,
mm-hmm,
and they haven't thought about their breathing.
mm,
So, a simple thing that I know from if I think about your question, there is what tools and techniques do people enjoy the most? And you said that
mm,
it's in your training pack. Well, actually, how do you manage your state first? Because
mm.
all your communication is a reflection of your current state.
Yep.
And we know that your state is in flux, it goes up and down all the
Mm-hmm,
time. And before you, let's say, pick up the phone, well, if you're not in the best state or frame of mind,
mm,
or that emotion that you desire is not there, well, you've got to manage that first.
mm,
And it could be standing up, it could be simply smiling, it could be thinking about smiling, and then being confident in knowing what your desired outcome is. So that mindset piece
mm,
is huge,
mm.
and we all run these programs in our minds about
Yeah.
how we get from where we are now to where we want to be. So I'm glad that you've got that in your training because I think
Mm,
that is really important. And I know personally from lots of experience that actually state management is key to begin with to manage your mindset.
mm. And that's a really, really good way of explaining it, and something that kind of it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine because I remember one of the first NLP sessions I done with you. You had like a whiteboard with some paper, and you drew the throughout the day. Your state will be here. You have your morning coffee. You're ready to go. You make a few calls. A client says "fuck off," then all of a sudden you're down here,
Yeah,
and then you go for lunch, and all of a sudden you're way down there because you've just
yeah.
ate a big bowl of pasta. And a lot of recruitment companies will do their BD power hours at 2 o'clock, which is straight after lunch. And recruiters, young recruiters, especially me when I was in my early 20s, did I know anything about nutrition and what carbohydrate? No. I would go and eat a massive calzone by myself with a full fat Coca-Cola and come back and go, right, time to do BD. And
Yeah.
again, you're not realizing that your breathing is not correct because you're like at your breath.
Yeah.
Physiologically, you're slumped over your desk like that because you've just eaten a huge bloody pizza or calzone, right? And then like your belief is, oh my God, I'm so tired. Oh, how am I going to do this? How are you then going to influence other people if you haven't influenced your state in the right way? So I think, yeah, in terms of the techniques I like, just on that, that's one of the first things I go through with people, and I'm sure you must have had this, but and maybe this is just me, but I don't necessarily I won't say that I get frustrated by it, but when you know something and someone else hasn't woken up to how this works yet, and they
Yeah.
sit there and you say, right, okay, so we're going to do some cold calling, and they're sat there like, oh, I hate it, and you're like, you don't realize that you're in control of your own state, and there's a few things that you could do to get yourself into a way better state, but you're refusing to do it. And I said this to you before we started recording, but and you'll agree with this, hopefully, we can't change someone else's state. They have to want to be able to do it. And I've got friends as well that are going through pretty terrible times right now, and I've offered them loads of help and support, but it's like, unless you actually want to action this stuff, I
Mhm.
can't physically make you better. I can't physically change your state. I can influence it, but you
Yes.
have to want to do it.
Yeah. And that's the key there. What you've just said towards the end is somebody has to want to change. Yeah. So if they want to change, they're 50% of the way there already.
Hmm.
You can influence somebody's state because our states are infectious.
Hmm.
So yeah, you can, think about questions. Questions are spells, right? If you ask the
Hmm.
right question, actually you can elicit somebody's state. If somebody's,
Hmm.
let's say, in a poor state of mind and you wanted to ask for annual leave, and your manager's sitting there, they're not in a great state. You can see they're all flustered, lots going on. And you say, you walk over, you haven't observed their state, and then you ask them a problematic question, something that you're really struggling with. The likelihood is that they're not in the best frame of mind, the best state, and they probably won't give you their best self.
Hmm.
Whereas, if you walked over and said, I don't know, something along the lines of, what was the best holiday or what was the best incentive that this recruitment have offered that you really enjoyed?
Hmm.
And just look at what happens in their response and see whether they feel excited and recall, actually, this is why I'm here. This is why it's so good. Then you're
Hmm.
starting to shift somebody's state. So you can be influential with your state. And that will allow other people to get out of their own way. And I think that's really important when you talk about state management. How do
Yeah.
people get out of their own way? You just said, well, actually, I hate BD. You know, if I can recall the words correctly, you said, I hate BD as an example when somebody's
Mm.
been asked to do it. Well, you see, that incantation, that spell that they cast upon themselves in that moment will fire off a state that's unwanted. It's not
Mm.
useful.
Mm.
So you would want that individual to understand how can I talk to myself? How can I speak
Mm.
with myself in my own mind that's going to get the best out of myself?
Mm.
And that will start to change the way that you feel. And remember this quote, and I think this is a quote I teach my kids.
Mhm.
And also, you know, I think should be taught in school. Your feelings are the most natural thing, right? I mean, how you respond feeling wise, it appears.
Mm.
How you then label that feeling defines its emotion. So, yeah, let's say, you know, for somebody who's been asked to talk in front of a client, right? They're
Mm.
going to a meeting and you know, they start to get, you know, sweaty palms, speedy sweat, forehead, whatever it might be, heart palpitations,
Mm.
and they decide to call that moment or that emotion anxiousness. I'm feeling anxious
Mm.
in that moment. Now, I'm not sitting there saying that you have to trick yourself and go to this utopian jump with state management. Yet, relabeling that emotion in that moment might allow you to unlock that freedom to just be you. So instead of
Yeah.
calling yourself, you know, or saying to yourself that I'm feeling anxious, you might say, I feel the adrenaline running.
Mm.
Yeah. I feel that I'm in the zone or I'm getting ready to be in the zone.
Mm.
I'm more alert.
Mm.
Just something that's going to fire off a different response within you. And then what you'll begin to notice is maybe your your thoughts will change.
Mm.
And you know, we know this, that your thoughts are not really real. I mean, your
Mm.
thoughts aren't real. It's one of those bizarre points that um, I ask many individuals, you know, is your thought real? And some people say yes, some people say no. The reality is, if we talk about realness, is that the only thing real is your behavior.
Mm.
Yeah, so your thoughts are great. They can be useful and not so useful.
Mhm.
It's how you respond to that thought. The
Yeah.
second you behave in a certain way, then you'll get closer to reality, whatever reality
Yeah. I mean, I could be in the worst possible state and I'd want to, sometimes I'll have the thought of, I just want to hit this person in the face. It's not true though. I've not done it. I might think that,
is.
but unless I actually go and hit a recruiter in the face, which sometimes, believe me, I've wanted to when people don't do what they bloody say. But yeah, like I've always said that, and it always tricks people when I do like academies and stuff, and then I think this, I think that, and I'm like, thoughts aren't real. It's actually what you do that's actually real. But like you said, and I think it's an important point to say on that last thing there is thoughts and beliefs are kind of in the same category
Yeah.
in some respect, and beliefs can be hugely beneficial. Like my belief there of I'm going to be, and I know it's ridiculous, but I'm going to be a legend. I'm
Yeah.
going to be the best business developer. That's this is a whole other topic of conversation, but that's like the conversation of ego, where ego can help drive you, but it can destroy you. And if you're
Sure.
very self-aware of if your ego's helping you and it's not hindering other people, that belief and that thought that you have can help drive you towards your desired outcome, your goal,
Yes.
whatever it might be. But it really does come down to behavior. And I've done a piece for Hisham on his website, Hector, about how beliefs, behaviors, and habits essentially are the three like pillars or pinnacles of your life that drive absolutely everything. Everything in your life comes down to those three things, I would say.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, you've got thoughts and beliefs. Well, yeah, your beliefs are made up of a combination of how you think.
Mm.
So, you know, we spoke about state management, and then we can talk about maybe another area that a lot of
Hmm.
recruitment companies are interested to hear about is how we handle objections, how we
Mm.
handle rejection or
Hmm.
those rebuttals. And that comes down to what we believe
Mm.
and how we think. So all beliefs have the same structure. So we all have a cause effect meaning. So that structure, without going into too much detail, will help us define our belief.
Mm.
And as we unpack that and be able to explore that belief, whether it's empowering or limiting, we then recognize that we find ways to change the way that we think to be more purposeful,
Mm,
be more empowered, more intentional, more directive in
mm,
what we desire. So, yes, our thoughts do create our beliefs. And if you think about beliefs and values, you'd say they go hand in hand, right?
mm,
Because values being what's most important to you,
mm,
and then you think about your beliefs, how we think about ourselves, how we think about the world,
mm,
etc. And they go hand in hand. So if you want to be a legend, which isn't ridiculous, by the way, because where will you be in 5 years, 10 years time if you continue doing what you're doing so well?
mm,
You could be seen as a legend within recruitment if that's your goal. How you get there will be a matter of understanding what your vision is,
mm,
understanding what the values are that you're going to work towards on a day-to-day basis, and then what are the behaviors which are congruent, i.e., they align to those values and that vision, will enable you to get there quicker.
mm,
And I think if you think about companies, the amount of times I say, "What's your vision?" and they say, "This is my vision," and I'll say, "Okay, let me go ask your team," and they'll have, "Do we even have a vision?"
yeah.
Or I might say, "What is your vision?" And they say, "I haven't worked on it," or it
Mm,
changed from last year. And
yeah.
look, that's okay to a degree. Then you say, "What are your values? What's most important to you in this business?" And they'll say, "Oh, I know my values." Because that's one thing that we've all been trained to do. We've got four values: integrity and honesty
Yeah.
and openness. Okay, how does your team demonstrate those values through behavior?
Mm,
And I'll say, "Give me the top three things," and they can't do it. They'll give me very vague, high level
mm,
things that they believe are their behaviors. And even if they do describe it well, the question then becomes is, does your team, those people who work for you, understand those expectations around the behaviors?
mm.
So, look, there's a lot in there, of course,
Yeah.
but going back to the thoughts and understanding how can you reframe the thoughts. So
Mm,
that is really when I'm touching upon the second most important area that companies ask me to come
mm,
and work with them on is actually how do you reframe those
yeah.
beliefs? How do you use patterns to overcome those limiting beliefs? So
Mm,
that's really, really powerful if you can be really aware of those thoughts and then
yeah.
break those patterns.
Yeah, because on that, because I think that's a really useful set of tools, techniques, strategies, etc. Because the most common limiting beliefs I would say that I hear from recruiters will be the market's tough right now. My first question to that when I say that is, how can you prove to me the market is tough right now? And
Yeah.
they say, oh, it's really tough to pull jobs. I was like, okay, so why is your colleague pulling jobs? I don't know. Okay, so that's just again we go back to that's a thought, that's a belief, right? So that's one of the first ones. I'm bad at BD or BD's hard. And clients, I don't want to bother clients. Nobody wants to be pestered. So those three, the market's tough, BD's hard, or I'm not good at BD, and clients don't want to be pestered. I would say are the most common limiting beliefs that I get from a very like broad variety of levels of recruitment consultants and even up to directors sometimes. I've worked with directors that have been in recruitment 10 years that will utilize those limiting beliefs and they don't help them any step of the way. So if someone like that is listening to this, or maybe a manager, another coach, a founder is listening to that, and they're like, we're really struggling to rid them of these limiting beliefs or help them overcome this and change their beliefs, like what's your advice or how would you approach it?
Yeah, I like what you said at the beginning. You're almost seeking evidence to either support or contradict that
Mm,
belief. Even in the statements that you make, I can't. So that's what we call it a modal operator in NLP, but that's limiting in itself.
mm,
Um, it's how you're thinking. Nobody is another word that you used, which is a universal quantifier. It's a generalization,
mm,
layman's term. So, you're casting that sort of net across the whole industry and every single person that you're talking to. And what you're looking for is evidence to contradict it.
mm,
Um, and then, clients, all clients, think about what you're saying. They're clients.
mm,
Well, which clients, what specific clients are you referring to? You're looking for that
mm,
evidence. So it's actually looking for ways to break that thought pattern.
mm,
And the second we recognize those thoughts that we cast upon ourselves and others, because if I say it, I might talk to the person next to me, and that person might say, "Yeah, I agree with you."
Mm.
And then you become this almost, let's say, clique that
Yeah.
says, "Yeah, the industry's bad." But when is it not difficult? When is it not difficult? I mean, any industry, aren't you going to go through hard times and challenges? And I'll
Yeah.
give you a really good example of this, COVID, right?
Mm.
Um, so you know that I've trained many, many people in NLP,
Hmm.
practitioners and master practitioners, and the number of coaches that I coach.
Mm.
During the COVID period, the number of people who said, Ricky, I just don't know, the landscape's completely changed now, and it's really difficult. I can't do this. And the reframe on that is, well, this is the perfect opportunity.
Mm.
And obviously, people are taken aback and said, well,
Yeah.
what do you mean it's the perfect opportunity? And yes, there are challenges, we'll be a bit of a realist in all this, is to then say, well, you trained so much to get to this point, so you could manage your mindset.
Mm.
You teach other people how to reframe or how to, have a better outlook. And
Mm.
yet, when you're faced with a little bit of adversity, maybe not a little bit to some people, but faced with adversity, your first response is to say, I can't do this.
Mm.
Whereas if you step out of your own ways to say, well, how could I change the way that I think to start adapting my behavior in a way that's going to allow me to, leverage this?
Mm.
And those who did found new ways of working,
Mm.
and actually created other businesses, created other opportunities. In some cases, I know have been, more successful in other industries or been exceptional coaches in a niche market.
Mm.
And that's just by reframing that thought in that moment, by looking
Mm.
at those challenges that you do face on a day-to-day basis. It is tough, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. It's very tough. And do you know what? I had someone talk to come onto the podcast. Sorry. And they were a diversity and inclusion expert, and they talked about privilege. And when they said the term like, and I won't get into this on this particular show, they talked about like white privilege and male privilege, all the rest of it. And I said, but I didn't say this particular thing, but I said there's things in my life that I would say I'm very privileged in, but I won't say that I'm. It's not because I've been gifted these things. I'm privileged that I made the right decisions. Like old me made these decisions and got me to do certain things. Like I said to my missus the other day when we were walking the dog, that when I was 23, 24 years old, when I first started working with yourself, I would be working 5 days a week in the office, then going to Marble Arch to go and sit in a hotel room to study NLP for like 9 till 5 on the weekend, then back to the grind in the office 9 to 5 the next week. And pretty much all of my friends, most of my colleagues were like, "You're absolutely mental, but at least the company's paying for it." No, I'm paying for it out my own pocket and it costs thousands of pounds. But because of that, yes, cool, it's helped me set up my own business and helped me be a successful recruiter. But what it has done is it's allowed me to develop these habits now that when a terrible thing happens in life, or if a client suddenly turns around to me and says, right, we're good, we don't want to work with you, and I'm like, fuck, I'm like thousands of pounds down per month, my brain almost automatically can reframe it now and go, cool, so this is actually what's happened. Is there a lesson? Is there a positive? What's the action? Boom, go.
Mm.
Like before, Ricky, and you used to know me before, I used to be super anxious. I would be late for everything all the time and all the rest of it. And I'd be rushing around all the rest of it. Now it's like, and again, this is just years of compounding the knowledge and actually actioning the stuff that you learn. There's no point learning something and not actually putting it into action. But it's now if a train's cancelled and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm a little bit tipsy and I'm like, fuck, how am I going to get home? God, 23-year-old me would be freaking the fuck out. Oh my God. Now it's just like, it is what it is. Okay, cool. This is what I maybe could have left earlier, whatever. So anyway, that's a little bit of a ramble from me, but I just wanted to explain to people that like this thing about belief change, and we talked a lot about state change as well. It's actually relatively simple, but like once you action it and create it as a habit and be disciplined with that habit, it will fucking change your life, man. Honestly.
Yeah, and you're always learning, right? I mean,
Mm,
what you said there is that you focus on something to be better at.
mm,
You got out what you put in.
mm,
You chose to make that decision of investing in yourself, and you're starting to, if not go beyond, starting to reaping the rewards of
mm,
that effort. And this whole piece about learning. you know, people say to me, "How many books have you read?" And they'll show. I mean, I've got books here, but
Mm,
no, they'll show me shelves and shelves and shelves of books, and they'll read it cover to cover, and I'll say, "Okay, give me the top three things that you've applied from that
mm,
book. Forget the top three tips, just what you've applied."
mm,
And people struggle, and people will struggle to tell me that they've taken a really powerful tip or a technique in the first chapter and just gone all in to apply it for 21 days, 90
mm.
days, and been disciplined to see whether or not it does work and whether they can learn from it. So they can tell me that they read 50 books. That's good. I mean, don't get me wrong, it does widen your, let's say your landscape in your mind,
Mm,
your map. At the same time, it's then how do you then go and apply it?
mm,
So if you're learning, which is what you talk about, that compound effect, you're learning, you're applying, that will allow you to become better on a
mm.
day-to-day basis and, think about the 1% that you talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that actually I remember you saying because I say to people, I mean, you can see I've got books here, and on that shelf there, there's just a shitload of personal development books. When I first set this business up, a good friend of mine, and he's been a little bit of a mentor to me as well. I asked him like, what books do you recommend that I read? And he giggled, and he was just like, mate, I could recommend you some books to read, but I'll give you a bit of advice. It's not what, it's who, or it's not how, it's who. And I was like, okay. And he went, I would rather than read books in year one, I would go out, network, build relationships, ask people that have done it or people in your
Sure.
market what they've done, what they found challenging, and then implement what you've learned. And I was like, oh. So I went from like reading on the train to kind of just listening to music or doing whatever and thinking in my mind, like, oh, I should be doing more, I should be doing more. But then I come home and then I have dinner with my missus and I'm like, I met this founder the other day and he struggled with this. So they pivoted this particular way, action that. And that's actually given me an idea and that's what I'm going to be doing. And then boom, I've started to implement it. And I'm like, fuck. So it is good. Like I've started to listen to audiobooks recently and I've started reading the Alan Carr Easy Way to Quit Vaping because it's beyond a fucking joke now. I need to stop. But it's been very interesting. And every step of the way through that book, and the reason why I mention this is because of what you just said there, there's action points in it. A
Mm,
lot of books sometimes, like I've got the chimp paradox there and a few other things. It's
yeah.
like they're great and they give you an understanding of how human psychology works and stuff, but there's not so many action points. Whereas in this book, every single chapter there's an exercise, and it's like every single time you're going to vape, you've got to take in all your five senses and stuff, and it's really fascinating. So yeah, I agree with what you were saying then.
Yeah. And I think I might know who you're talking about because there's many people within the space who have gone on to be trainers in the
Hmm.
recruitment field, who studied NLP, um, and doing very well. I think it's really important. So, it's like that who. So you
Mm,
mentioned who. Think about what I said about NLP at the beginning. They looked at these experts and
mm,
who were they in those fields.
mm,
And when you have that point of authority, you almost have a a belief system that says, I want to go and model that person because they've got the
mm,
results that I want. And what I want to do is replicate it. So you almost take in that who um, and deciding, well, actually, I can do this as well. This is
yeah.
how I do it. So I think that's really important. So it's in a nutshell, we're looking at the why, which is what you spoke
Mm,
about almost at the beginning with legend, being
hmm,
a legend. We've touched upon how. We're starting to talk about tools and techniques. You've touched upon who
hmm,
in that moment. At the same time, when you talk about beliefs, that's more about why. We have to be
hmm,
careful with that question. I really do
mm,
think, because when you start asking people why, you are tapping into people's beliefs, but sometimes instead of getting reasons, you get excuses. So we have to be very
mm,
mindful of that. And I'll always go back to how. I'll always go
mm,
back to how. How
mm.
do we do what we do so well?
Yeah. Something that I wanted to bring up with you because I put together a training session on this ages ago when I first got into NLP about hypnotic language patterns. And as you can imagine from what I said at the start of the show, it was the most overcomplicated word salad presentation you've ever seen in your entire life. And the feedback from the CEO was didn't understand a single fucking word of it. And I was like, great. So I redefined it and then I made it less wordy and I used like popular culture icons. So instead of like the absolute, it was like a bottle of absolute vodka. And instead of the mind read, it was the mind reader with
Yeah.
Charles Xavier. And
Sure.
Yeah, there's a few other ones, right? But I've worked with people before that like, oh, these language patterns are complete bullshit. They don't work. Again, that's their own belief, and that's absolutely
Well,
fine. And sometimes when someone has got such a strong belief, you could show them all the evidence, and they
yeah.
still would ignore it, and that's fine. But I've recently been doing the language pattern presentation with people, and what's really fascinating is when you talk through the 90% of the brain being your subconscious and the 10% being the conscious brain, you see all the recruiters in the room from like, right, we're doing a training session call to, fuck, really? So my brain's only actually responsible for those types of things. And then when you actually explain to them how the language patterns influence the subconscious mind, and
Yeah.
I whenever I do training and a lot of the time on the podcast, I always try to give anecdotes to kind of back this up, and say that, as I mentioned earlier in the show about that language pattern course I went on with yourself, and then I done the retained pitch the very next day. That was all essentially doing language patterns, and I love using them in
Yeah.
coaching and in sales pitches, and just doing the sensory acuity, looking at their facial movements and stuff like that, to them, just like their eyes will go a certain way and go, yeah, yeah, that is a problem, Charles. Yeah, well, how can you help me? And then boom, then you've kind of got them. So I'd like to get you to maybe tell us a little bit more about how these hypnotic language patterns work and how they can ultimately help recruiters, business owners, etc., influence people.
Okay. So first things first, I will personally say that I don't call them the hypnotic language patterns. And whilst they were studied and modeled from Milton Erickson, who was, you
Mhm.
could say, the godfather of hypnosis. So the NLP co-creators who modeled Milton Erickson, and that's why they call it the hypnotic language
Mm.
patterns. I personally, when I go into companies, call them the advanced language patterns.
Mhm.
So that's what I call them. You could call them the Ericksonian language patterns as well,
Mhm.
to, I suppose, give credit to Milton Erickson.
Mhm.
These patterns that we're referring to, actually, we use them all the time, every day anyway. So it's not like we're saying to somebody, I'm going to teach you something new. If you can communicate, and you do, and you have a good grasp of, let's say, verbal and written communication, these language patterns will allow you just to understand the structure
Mm.
of the language that we use. And what we notice is that when we start to change or edit the structure of that language, we get a different response. So how does one recruiter get a response from a client or a candidate and another recruiter doesn't? Most often, whilst you have the non-verbal communication, it's the choice of words that they're using.
Mhm.
So using these advanced language patterns, going in, and I like what you've done there, which is to appeal to, I suppose, the parts of some people who, maybe find that the labels behind the language patterns are more difficult than what they should be. We
Mm.
didn't name them. Um, is to then understand, well, how can I make it more relatable and
Mm.
easier to digest? So going into companies, you could say this is the third technique that is asked for quite often, is showing people how these language patterns work. Because no matter what workshop, what training, what coaching that you do,
Mm.
people want tangible results. People want
Yeah.
something that's quite pragmatic. They take it, they want to be able to apply it, and they want to see results.
Mm.
And if you show somebody that what they're currently doing has limitations, and if they edited one thing and it would make a difference, that starts to create some evidence that what you're offering is impactful and useful.
Mm.
So these language patterns, where it comes from in the 70s from Milton Erickson, were used to put people in a hypnotic trance and then offer suggestions to the unconscious mind.
Mm.
And what we're now doing is saying, how can you stop being in this autopilot at work where you're writing an email, you're writing your BD emails, you're communicating through scripts over the phone, and
Mm.
you're not recognizing that the language that you're using is holding you back.
Mm.
And if you start to maybe change even the ending of your email, it will change the way that people respond.
Mm.
If you pause as an example, you then realize actually that uncomfortable space means somebody will respond. So you start to notice that these language patterns are what we do anyway,
Mm.
yet we want to be more effective using these language patterns. And
Mm.
that's what it's about.
Mm.
Uh, and what this, this conversation has allowed us to do, hopefully, especially those who are listening, is NLP could sound complicated. Going on a sales training course could be complicated. BD development courses could be complicated. Yet if we make them simple, we simplify them, teach people in terms of layman's terms, if you think about what you're
Mm,
doing, and make people walk away with something that is tangible, well, actually, you'll get results. You'll
mm,
get people who will say, this isn't as difficult as I thought it was.
mm. Yeah, do you know what makes me laugh as well is that when I first put together the language pattern course, one of the CEOs I worked with was like, "Mate, these aren't like NLP language patterns. That's just an alternative close. That's just
Yes.
finishing
Yeah.
up by saying right with a question mark. That's just what I use all the time." I was like,
Sure.
"Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not saying I'm giving you fucking questions and language that have never been used by you or me before. These are just trying to educate our staff and our recruiters that we are unconsciously using this language. That's the big thing for me is how do we become a little bit more conscious with what we're doing
Yes.
and purposeful with what we're doing, which is I know
Yeah.
something that you're huge on. From your perspective, because on those two things, when I help consultants do their email marketing and closing clients and trying to get commitment from clients, my two favorite would be the double bind or the alternative close from your more traditional sales model, and then the tag question. Because I remember you used to say to me, the tag question is brilliant because it softens resistance. So if you're speaking to someone and you say, "So this is the proposal, these are our terms, and it's a quarter of the fee up front," which is only a small amount, wouldn't you agree? Or it's only a small amount, right? And it softens the resistance. It gets the client to go, yeah, that to be fair, it's not too bad. And then the double bind of right, so let's get Ricky and Charles on a call on, I don't know, should we look at Tuesday or Wednesday? Or
Yeah.
should we do this afternoon or tomorrow morning? And again, that way it's just two options. It kind of offers the illusion of choice. And those two for me work really well with closing, getting commitment. And the final thing I'll say before I stop rambling is what you said there about silence. So many recruiters and salespeople are so uncomfortable in the silence.
Cool.
It's insane how people are so uncomfortable. And I go through an exercise with recruiters all the time where I basically get them to imagine a mute button next to the side. And I said, when you're speaking, where you would usually say and I would get them to visualize a big red mute button, and I want you to push the table to mute yourself. So when you're about to say and mute. And it's
Mm.
miraculous when you're in a room with like 7 or 8 consultants and that person's going, "Hi, Ricky. Today we're going to talk about this." And people are like, "Oh my God, he just sounds so much more professional, sounds so much more certain and confident in what they're saying just by utilizing a couple of seconds of silence." But yeah, that's my little ramble. I'll leave it with you now.
So what's your question?
So those are my two favorite language patterns that I
Sure.
utilize with people. And obviously, I wanted to kind of talk as well about why I think the power of silence
Yeah.
is so crucial from your perspective. And again, you might not necessarily have a favorite or whatever, but especially in a recruitment context, out of the advanced language patterns that you go through with people and teach people, what would you say are a couple of snippets for people to perhaps take away from this that you think could be most valuable for recruiters, recruitment leaders, etc.?
Yeah. Good question. So that tag question that you talk about, yes, we do this anyway, right?
Hmm.
As I just did. But what I'm doing is I'm testing to see whether I'm gaining somebody's agreement
Mm,
in that moment, or whether or not that person, through their nonverbal communication, is unsure about what I'm saying. So I'm
mm,
just testing the waters there. And that's useful. And we use a tag question often.
mhm,
The reason why the double bind or the illusion of choice is so powerful is because, you will see at the end of an email, I hope to hear from you soon. And it's very vague and people want people to respond and yet they'll
mm,
leave it very open. Everybody has a choice at the end of the day. So even if you do use you know, the the double bind and you
mm,
say, oh, would you like to, you know, meet next Thursday or next Friday, that person still has a choice,
mhm,
but at least they have an option to think about.
mm.
Whereas hopefully hear from you soon doesn't really give people much.
Yeah.
They'll just put their own priorities over your
Mm,
response, as an example. So I think the double bind is very powerful, just so you're aware. So what's my favorite is the question there. Yeah, the double bind is definitely there.
mhm,
I really like how the cause and effect lead on to that double bind.
Mm.
because the cause and effect being, if you did this, then this will happen. So if
Mhm.
you get your CV across to me by, you know, close of business today, then I can speak to the client and put your CV forward first. So it's almost like there's the cause, there's the effect, and then you could throw in which means,
Mm.
and if you recall from this conversation, all our beliefs have a structure of cause, effect, meaning.
Mhm.
So that cause effect and then the meaning will allow you to shift somebody's belief and response rate. So I like the cause effect meaning. The other one there is almost the embedded suggestion, where
Mm.
you're not telling somebody to do something, but you're inviting them to consider it.
Mm.
So if I invite you to consider everything that we've spoken about and choose one thing that has resonated with you and then go and apply it, what would that be? I'm wondering.
Mm.
So I'm not telling you to go and do it. I'm just inviting you to consider it.
Mm.
And that way, if you're communicating over the phone, you could ask a question just to get somebody's opinion, which people love to talk about. Ask for their advice because you're asking for their help.
Mm.
And if you use that embedded suggestion, that allows them to then respond in a way that's more comfortable for them. So
Mm.
there are a couple there very quickly on some of the
Mm.
language patterns.
I'm wondering if this is the embedded suggestion, but something that I used to use, and I remember I had a good friend of mine, um, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? He basically sat in the room whilst I'd done my pitch for retained business. It was the last one about a month before we went into COVID lockdown. And after I'd done my pitch and I discovered their needs, their pains, their wants, etc. I'd done the pitch and then I took a bit of silence and they had their little pitch deck in front of them to kind of go through. And I said, well, look, after I've gone through everything with you guys, you might be wondering how this is actually going to save you guys money. And they
Sure.
looked at me and I could see their like body language was like, yeah. And I was like, and I know that you said that saving time was possibly the most important. And looking at the stuff in front of you and hearing what I've said here, you're probably wondering that, or probably thinking that this is the solution that will actually save you the most amount of time and also money. And they go, yeah, to be honest, that does it does make a lot of sense. And I was like, and you might have some concerns, but I have a feeling that you might not. And they're like, no, we don't really have any concerns at all. And then like I can see my colleague like vigorously making notes, like, how the fuck is he doing this? And then they jokingly said like, oh, because it was back in the days where WeWork was actually fun, and there was a cheese and wine night downstairs, and I tried to close them for any objections, and I was like, is there anything that you think is going to stop you? Anyone else that's involved in the decision making process? And they were like, no, like we just want to have a little bit of time to think about it. Why don't we have a glass of wine and some cheese downstairs? And long story short, I may have said this on the podcast before, but they kind of wound me up. I was like 25 at the time, and they said we had that spinning wheel in the office, the multicolored wheel with all the
Yeah, yeah,
prizes.
yeah.
They took Tim upstairs with me to the two hiring managers and said, "How about we spin the wheel and you get to pick five colors, and we'll pick five colors. If it lands on your color, we'll sign the retainer now. If it lands on our color, we'll go with another recruitment company." And Tim's just literally done like the huddle like that. Is he fucking with us? I was like, I don't know. And he was like, he looks fucking serious. I pick this color, pick that color, landed on my color. I jumped out there like that. And he went, the minute you closed us in that meeting, we'd already signed.
Yeah.
We were already there. Everything that you'd done in the pitch, we were like, this is it. But we had no, in our minds, we have no reason to do that. But yeah, going back to what I was saying, is that like the embedded suggestion that the line of question that I was using?
Well, funny enough, that you started with "I'm wondering." That's how you
Mm.
started. So you're getting me to think about what you're about to say next. So
Hmm.
you wasn't leading with a question until you got to the end. And
Hmm.
as you shared that, and you're talking about inviting them to consider, and your questioning allowed that person to come up with maybe their decision. But it sounds like you've done a lot more than just the language pattern.
Mm.
It doesn't sound like it is. You did a lot more. I
Yeah.
mean, you talk about pain points, you talk about the benefits, you talk
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
why it would help them. They made their decision. You know, you already acknowledged that there was nothing that would stop them. There was no objections to it, as an
Yeah.
example. So there was loads in there already. And they were being playful with you because they knew they were going to sign up anyway. So,
Mm.
um, and this brings on a slightly different point, I would say, is sometimes we're really good at what we do. We just don't recognize how we've been so good.
Mm.
And if we broke that down, and hence why you might say, go do some, desk side coaching with somebody,
Hmm.
is because you want to be able to observe how somebody does what they do. Because if I said to you, Charles, I think you're great at closing
Mm,
and I want to spend some time with you, but before I go and spend some time with you, could you just teach me how you do what you do? You
mm,
would miss so much. But yet you would give me these salient points and
mm,
expect me to walk away and go, yeah, well, Charles said these are the three top things that I need to go away and do. I go away and try it, and it doesn't work because there's
mm,
so much that you're missing. So
mm,
hence why coaching and observations, feedback and follow up is so important.
mm,
But I'll also add to everything that I've just said there around what you're asking me is you asked for the business.
mm.
And sometimes we do all the hard work and we just don't ask for the business. We won't even say, would you like to go ahead? Or is there anything that's stopping you from going ahead right now?
Mm.
And we just go, oh, it's been really good. Hopefully you loved our presentation. We look forward to hearing from you. Yeah, speak to you soon. It's like,
Mm. I coached this girl called Zoe for years, and her favorite quote of mine was "Ask the fucking question,"
right.
because she was quite a nervous, anxious young recruiter, and she'd get off the phone. And I'm like, "Did you ask for the retainer? Did you ask for exclusivity? Did you ask for slot?" No, I didn't, and it stemmed from a limiting belief from her perspective, low
Sure.
self-esteem, all the rest of it. And after years of coaching, she'd get off the phone and she went, I could just hear your fucking voice in my ear. Ask
Yeah.
the fucking question. Ask the fucking question. And now she's got this belief and this, and she's actually driving it through her behavior of asking the question. And I had another girl that I worked with recently. I can't remember her name, with a new business I'm working with, and she said, "How do I get more commitment from clients? Ask.
Yeah. Yeah,
If
absolutely.
you
Uh,
haven't got exclusivity or interview slots, ask."
yeah. And there's 2 points I think is really important when you think about selling.
Mm,
Number one, when you're in front of a client, as an example, they know why you're there. You know why you're there. So what stops you from having that conversation?
mm,
And the second point being, actually, you're doing that individual a disservice by spending that much time with that individual and then not asking for the business.
mm,
So, you've got two really important and powerful reasons to ask for the business in that moment.
mm. So true.
Yeah.
Well, Ricky, I'm very conscious of time, mate, but I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. And I think there's been an absolute shed ton of value for people to gain from this. But as you know, I like to finish every episode off with the same question. Following this episode, how do people get 1% better in recruitment?
Good question. Purposeful practice is my response to that. So uh, we know we want to be better at something, and we will say something like, "Oh, I want to be better at eating healthily." I want to be better at closing deals, as an example, whatever it might be. So we have some idea of what it is that we want. So we need to have that purpose about where we want to be better. So you take that area and you become really disciplined on a daily basis at improving and moving the dial 1% each day. The biggest challenge behind that is people will place their full value or judgment on the first time of trying a tool or technique. So they'll go in, they'll try something and it doesn't work and they'll say, ah, but where was the purposeful practice? You have to do this over and over again.
Mm,
And the more you do this, the better you'll become. And if you don't have this utopian jump of I need to change from being A and I have to have 100% shift to going to B, well, actually, if you've just gone from A and moved the dial 1%, well, actually, you'll get better. Imagine what happens over 365 days. People have heard
mm,
this before, you know. So shift the dial 1% through purposeful practice, remain disciplined, keep the end goal in mind.
mm.
And before you know it, you will be achieving big change in the eyes of others, but it was small, subtle changes on a daily basis that got you there.
I love that. I've had such a variety of different answers, and that's got to be one of my favorite answers because it's something that I try and explain to people, probably not as articulately as you've put there, but it's so true. And I'm sure you might get this sometimes because when I've been to your courses and you're speaking, I've noticed other people say like, "Oh, you're very good at speaking," blah blah blah, and you've always said it's because I've been doing this for so long. And when I go and do like training academies or workshops or continuous coaching with businesses, and I'll say, "Go on then, chuck me some objections. I'll do some role plays," and then I do it, and it's obviously textbook because A, I've been doing this for years, and B, I'm now teaching people how to do it. So if I can't demonstrate it at a very high level and I'm supposed to be the one teaching you how to deal with objections, then you should probably just get a refund from working with me or another trainer, in my opinion. But I get people saying, "Oh, how have you got so good?" Well, A, I've been doing it for fucking 11 years. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's been a long time I've been doing this. And B, I've gone through the different styles of this and rehearsed it in my head and written the training material, and it's been purposeful practice. So yeah, I think that's just it's a real phenomenal answer, Ricky. And thank you very much for coming on. For people that want to get in touch with you, mate, what's the best way for people to reach out to you, and what types of people should reach out to you?
Okay, good questions in terms of what types of people, what anybody who wants to enhance the way that they think, feel, behave, communicate, and generate results. I mean, that's a wide spectrum, right? And as I mentioned at the beginning, I work with a wide variety of individuals and teams from lots of different companies. So if we're talking about recruitment,
Hmm.
well, if you're a business owner and you want to have an outside perspective, somebody who to come in and challenge the way that you think, maybe what you're currently doing, then you might want to bring me in from that perspective. If you have a billing manager or you have a leadership team and they're struggling to manage performance, not micromanage, but actually manage performance
Hmm.
through, congruent leadership behaviors, then we can look at that. And then you've got frontline teams. So those individuals who want to be better, it could be at building rapport, business development, language patterns, as you've spoken about. I mean, look, these are things that you do as well. So
Mm.
I appreciate the fact that we're talking about it. So if they want to get into contact with me, they can call me directly. And
Hmm.
I'm happy to share the number. You can put it in
Hmm.
under comments, etc. But it's 07788 888 313, or they can just drop me an email at info@raisingyourgame.co.uk. And I will personally respond. So if you do reach out to me, I will get back to you straight away. So they're the two ways you can naturally look me up on the website as well, which is www.raisingyourgame.co.uk.
Perfect. Well, people, thank you very much if you made it this far. I will say that I will vouch for Ricky. I've worked with Ricky on a one-to-one basis. I've been to back in the day when he used to do courses every single month. I got all my friends to come, my family to come. I got the NLP practitioner, and then years down the line, during the pandemic, actually in 2021, this was got my master prac, and it's been absolutely revolutionary for both a sales perspective, management perspective. But just personally as well, like relationships, my own personal mindset. As people know in previous episodes, I talked about mental health. Won't necessarily say these are things to fix mental health per se, but
Sure.
it allows you to rewire your brain in certain aspects to change your beliefs that you might have once thought, oh, I've got such crippling anxiety, when you actually realize it's just a reaction to certain things because of these other things. But anyway, we talked a lot about that. But thank you very much for listening. Go on, you were going to say
I
something?
was, I was going to say one last thing, a big credit and a well done to you, Charles,
Mm,
because like we've said from the beginning, we met many, many years ago.
mm,
And to see your journey from where you were to where you are right now is fantastic. And that's credit to you because you've been
mm,
applying yourself on a daily basis, whether that's
mm.
been within recruitment, whether that's been personally, or whether that's you looking at your martial arts, whatever it
Yeah.
might be. You've been applying yourself on a day-to-day basis. So all credit to you. And as always, I wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you, mate. Really appreciate that. Well, thanks very much for everyone that's made it this far. Like, subscribe, comment, all that type of stuff helps the algorithm, I guess. Yeah, I hope, whatever. But yeah, like, comment, subscribe, all that type of stuff. Subscribe to the newsletter as well so you can get the download on all the episodes. And until next time.